Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna. And did you send out a message that it's tomorrow also?
Yeah, so Devadev said he'd do it a day at a time.
Oh,
just in case it changes tomorrow.
I see, okay. Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Rasamrita, I hope you're all right. Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna. Okay, that's about it. Okay, devotees, Sichas Yadoljan Chitat Prabhupada-lilamrita. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Okay, devotees, we are reading chapter 9 of Prabhupada-lilamrita, resident of Vrindavan. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyadesh Tarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. All right. So Srila Prabhupada is in Vrindavan. Alone and poor, Abai returned to Vrindavan. He was 62, but he wasn't thinking of retiring. More than ever, his mood was reflective and renounced, because few people knew him, and because he wanted to write, he kept to himself. He enjoyed deep peace as a resident of Vrindavan. Outside his window, the sacred Yamuna flowed by in a peaceful panorama for his private audience. The Keshigat neighborhood was quiet, though in the pre-dawn he could hear a few devotees bathing and chanting. When the moon was full, the river seemed like a coolly resplendent jewel. And in the morning, the sun would appear like a red smudge, a fire burning through an opaque wall, at last bursting forth and clearing the entire sky, until in the hot blaze of noon, while the room would be in shadows, Abai could see from his window a shimmering sun high in the sky and glittering across the silver sheet of the gentle river. Without so much as leaving his room, from his doorway he could see hundreds of temples clustered together for miles in the friendly town of Vrindavan. The various punctual kirtans and bell ringings in the temples, the spontaneous songs to Krishna in numerous homes and in the streets, rose and filled the air with devotion. On the veranda, Abai could chant japa, and there would be no interruption. He enjoyed a simple, almost carefree life of minimized physical wants, a few hours of rest at night, a little prasadam at noon, the simplest clothing, and he did not have to flatter anyone, support anyone, or manage anyone's life. His mind and intelligence were free and dwelt constantly on his service to his spiritual master. He saw his present circumstances as a preparation for a greater task before him. Despite his advanced age, he felt that he had barely begun his work, yet he felt confident. He had his vision of a world association of devotees. It was not an idle dream, although he was not certain how it would all come about. But he knew his duty. For the present, he would go on describing his vision, the vision of his predecessor spiritual masters, in articles and books. But as soon as possible, he would go to the West. Westerners, he had concluded, were not satisfied with a materially comfortable life, devoid of spiritual understanding. More than his fellow Indians, they would be open to the message of the absolute truth. He knew he should go, and he would go if Krishna desired. Abai lived frugally in Vrindavan, keeping exact account of every expenditure and every receipt. He carefully kept a ledger, just as if he were running a substantial business, even though his purchases were only a little milk, a few vegetables, charcoal for cooking, bus rides, and his major expenditure, postage. Abai composed a Bengali poem, Vrindavan Bhajan. Its opening stanzas were especially self-reflective and personal. 1. I am sitting alone in Vrindavan Dham. In this mood, I'm getting many realizations. I have my wife, sons, daughters, grandsons, everything. But I have no money, so they're a fruitless glory. Krishna has shown me the naked form of material nature. By his strength, it has all become tasteless to me today. Yasyaham anugrinami harishye tadanam shanai, which means, I gradually take away all the wealth of those upon whom I am merciful, unquote. How was I able to understand this mercy of the all-merciful? 2. Everyone has abandoned me, seeing me penniless. Wife, relatives, friends, brothers, everyone. This is misery, but it gives me a laugh. I sit alone and laugh. In this Maya samsara, whom do I really love? Where have my loving father and mother gone now? And where are all my elders, who are my own folk? Who will give me news of them? Tell me who. All that is left of this family life is a list of names. 3. As the froth on the sea water mixes again in the sea, Maya Samsara's play is just like that. No one is mother or father or personal relative. Just like the sea foam, they remain but a short time. Just as the froth on sea water mixes again in the sea, the body made of 5 elements meets with destruction. How many bodies does the embodied soul take in this way? His relatives are all related merely to the temporal body. 4. But everyone is your relative brother on the spiritual platform. This relationship is not tinged with the smell of Maya. The Supreme Lord is the soul of everyone. In relation to him, everyone in the universe is the same. All your relatives, brother, all the billions of jivas, when seen in relation to Krishna, they're all in harmony. Forgetting Krishna, the jiva desires sense gratification, and as a result, he is firmly grasped by Maya. Wow, that's profound. Srila Prabhupada's realizations, very, very deep. On an October visit to Delhi, Abai received a donation from Kaviraj Baidyanath Serkar to be used for printing 1,000 copies of Back to Godhead. Abai promptly produced an October 20th issue of Back to Godhead with the donor's name on the front page. It was the first issue in 2 years. Another donor, Mr. Subodh Kumar Kapoor of Ramlal Kapoor and Sons, followed Mr. Sarkar's example and donated 1,000 copies for the November 20th issue. The front page article in the November issue was Truth and Beauty. An editorial in the Times of India speculating on whether truth and beauty were compatible had opined that truth was not always beautiful, but often ugly and unpleasant. Abai disagreed. Truth is so beautiful that many sages, saints, and devotees have left everything for the sake of truth. But we are habituated to love untruth from time immemorial in the name of truth. Abai agreed. Abai agreed, however, that mundane truth and beauty were incompatible. Not only was mundane truth not beautiful, it was not truth. And mundane beauty was not real beauty. To explain, Abai told a story. Once a man fell in love with a beautiful girl who tried to resist the man's advances. When he persisted, she requested that he wait for 7 days, after which she would accept him. During the next 7 days, the girl took a strong purgative and laxative and repeatedly passed stool and vomited. She stored the refuse in buckets. Thus, quote, the so-called beautiful girl became lean, thin like a skeleton, and turned blackish in complexion, and the beautiful eyeballs were pushed into the sockets of the skull. The man appeared on the scene well-dressed and well-behaved, and asked the waiting girl, who was depressed in appearance, about the beautiful girl who called him there. The man could not recognize the waiting girl as the same beautiful girl whom he was asking for. The same girl, however, was in a pitiable condition, and the foolish man, in spite of repeated assertion, could not recognize her. It was all due to the action of the medicine only. At last the girl told the powerful man all the story of her beauty and told him that she had separated the ingredients of her beauty and stored them up in the reservoirs. She also told him that he could enjoy the juices of beauty stored up in the reservoirs. The mundane poetic or the lunatic man agreed to see the juices of beauty, and thus he was directed to the store of loose stool and liquid vomit, which were emanating unbearable bad smell, and thus the whole story of beauty liquid was disclosed to him. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Well, that's a classic. That's such a classic, and it's so true. It's just so true. Ah, Krishna. It's amazing, actually. Prabhupada's so perceptive and so realized. Abai went on to assert that literature, which did not describe the ultimate truth and beauty of the Supreme Person, was no better than stool and vomit, even though it be presented as poetry and philosophy. In Standard Morality, Abai explained, morality is the standard of activity by which the supreme authority is satisfied. The scriptures, unquote, the scriptures contain moral codes prohibiting unholy sex relations, animal slaughter, intoxication, and gambling. Abai attributed Mahatma Gandhi's success as a public leader to his observance of these moral principles. Abai also praised the Vedic system of marriage. Quote, "After the attainment of puberty, a woman wants a male, and if she is not married within that time and allowed to mix up with boys, it is quite natural that there's every chance of fall down, either by the boy or the girl," unquote. Despite changing social conditions, Abai argued, quote, "You cannot indulge in unholy connection with the opposite sex just because the social conditions have changed, because unholy connection with women is the beginning of all morality." In Scholars Deluded, Abai presented a critical review of Dr. Radhakrishnan's edition of Bhagavad Gita, citing specifically the 34th verse of the 9th chapter, when Lord Krishna declares that one should always think of him and become his devotee. Dr. Radhakrishnan had commented, quote, "It is not the personal Krishna to whom we have to give ourselves up utterly, but the unborn, beginningless, eternal, who speaks through Krishna," unquote. Although the obvious meaning of Bhagavad Gita was that one should surrender to Krishna, the Supreme Person, impersonalists like Dr. Radhakrishnan obscured the direct meaning with their word jugglery. Yes, well, of course, that's just one of the most important factors, right up, perhaps the most important, but certainly one of them. We have to get Krishna consciousness as it is, and not as someone thinks it is, or someone would like it to be, or something of that sort. That's just so destructive, extremely destructive. And this Dr. Radhakrishnan, I don't know if Prabhupada mentions it. I mean, I don't know if it is mentioned further on in the Lilamrita, but he, I think, had a stroke and he became unable to talk. And Srila Prabhupada said that was because he had said all this nonsense, impersonal rubbish about Krishna. On the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Abai keenly felt separation from his spiritual master. He perfectly understood that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's instructions were more important than his physical presence, and that, in fact, the spiritual master was present within his instructions. In this way, Abai had always been with his spiritual master. Yet, on this annual day, Abai could not help feeling loss. He remembered how in 1932 he had been a grihasta and a new disciple. At that time, he had not been free to do as much service as now. Yet it had been in those days that he'd been able to see his spiritual master, offer obeisances before him, eat the remnants of his prasadam, walk beside him, hear his voice, receive his personal glance. Abai thought of their meetings together. How powerful had been Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mission. His presses had been running day and night, printing magazines, books, the Dailiya Nadia Prakash, and Europe had been a promising new preaching field. With Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur at the helm, the Gaudiya Math had entered into battle against Maya's forces, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had made all his disciples unafraid. Abai had always been eager to serve as spiritual master, to serve within the Gaudiya Math with its headquarters in Calcutta. But exactly how he would serve had never been clear to him until his last letter from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Abai looked back on the more than 20 years since his spiritual master's disappearance. The Gaudiya Math had been undone by its leaders, and everyone else had scattered like leaves in a storm. It was an unspeakable loss. And it was an old story, how the big sannyasis had disregarded their spiritual master's instructions and had intrigued, disputed, litigated, violent party factions, false leaders claiming to be world acharya, and which party had been right? No, both had been wrong, all wrong, because the Gaudiya Math had disintegrated. Now there were dozens of little maths and no preaching, no real preaching as before, when he, Singha Guru, had cast fear into the Mayavadis, had led an army of young powerful preachers to march throughout India and the world. And the greatest sufferers of the Gaudiya Math's dissolution were the people, the non-devotees, who had little hope of being delivered from the batterings of Maya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had begun a spiritual revolution, but that revolution had now been overthrown by Maya. The scattered particles of the Gaudiya Math had settled quietly into self-satisfied, insular, almost impotent units, and it was the people in general who suffered. Abai groped after memories of his spiritual master. He felt secure in that his own relationship with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was intact, continuing. Yet he felt helpless. He was diligently pursuing his spiritual master's order to preach in English, yet without his spiritual master's physical presence, he felt small and very much alone. At times like this, he questioned the wisdom of having left his family and business. Lamenting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's absence and the fall of the Gaudiya Math, he composed a Bengali poem, Viraha Ashtaka, which means 8 verses about separation. So this is it. This is the poem, Viraha Ashtaka. Srila Prabhupada, of course he's referring to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Srila Prabhupada, you were always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. An unlimited ocean of mercy, cutting an illusion. Nityananda distributed an ocean of flood of love of God. The Jati Gosai stopped the stream. Becoming yourself, Lord, you revealed this illusion. So once again, everyone was immersed in the flood of love. Even one so fallen, insignificant, and sinful as I, on the strength of Lord Chaitanya's order, you sent all of your servants door to door as gurus. There was preaching everywhere, from the sea to the Himalayas. Now, in your absence, everything is darkness. O Srila Prabhupada, you're always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. In the same way that Advaita Prabhu brought Lord Gora, so did Bhaktivinoda pray. His enthusiasm brought you. On the strength of his enthusiasm, you came, and made everyone understand that India is a holy land. One who takes his birth in the land of Bharat must make his life perfect and then preach to others. This Mahamantra message you preached everywhere. Now in your absence, Lord, everything is darkness. Your ocean of compassion has again been stopped. This spear of great misery has cut through my heart. Without Lord Chaitanya's message, there is just confusion. Seeing this, all the Vaishnavas feel pangs of separation. The conditioned souls are all in darkness once again. They're searching for peace, but are dying in an ocean of anxiety. O Srila Prabhupada, you're always compassionate towards the suffering jiva souls. On this occasion of your separation, I see only dejection. Unquote. Abhai's was a dark view. The golden era of preaching that had flourished in the days of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was no longer. By the influence of Maya, Abhay wrote, now everything is darkness. All devotional instructions have been destroyed. Now everything has been reversed. Meditating on that great personality, possessed of the divine power to save the entire world, Abhay expressed his feelings of weakness and helplessness. Because of those not fixed in devotional service, many branches have spread all over. Your conclusive message did not touch the air. Where will I get the strength for the Sankirtan movement? Unquote. How could he, a tiny spiritual child, survive without his spiritual father? Now who could save the world, which was so much more oppressed than ever before? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had said that a dead man could not preach. Only one with life could preach. As long as Abhay and others could deeply regret the Gaudiya Math's failure, there was still life and still hope. Quote, if everyone obtained this right and went out and made disciples, then the suffering souls in the world could be saved, unquote. It was useless to cry over what his godbrothers had done, yet in seeing and resenting it, Abhay found, within the pain of what might have been, a continuing spark of what might still be. Abhay sent this poem and Vrindavan Bhajan to Keshava Maharaj, who published them in the Gaudiya Patrika. One night, Abhay had a striking dream, the same dream he had had several times before during his days as a householder. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appeared just as Abhay had known him, the tall, scholarly sannyasi coming directly from the spiritual world, from Krishna's personal entourage. He called to Abhay and indicated that he should follow. Repeatedly he called and motioned. He was asking Abhay to take sannyas. Come, he urged, become a sannyasi. Abhay awoke in a state of wonder. He thought of this instruction as another feature of the original instruction Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had given him at their first meeting in Calcutta. The same instruction that his spiritual master had later solidified in a letter, become an English preacher and spread Krishna consciousness throughout the Western world. Sannyas was for that end. Otherwise, why would his spiritual master have asked him to accept it? Abai reasoned that his spiritual master was saying, quote, now take sannyas, and you will actually be able to accomplish this mission. Formally, the time was not right, unquote. Abai deliberated cautiously. By accepting sannyas, a Vaishnav dedicates his body, mind, and words totally to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, renouncing all other engagements. He was doing that already. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had offered sannyas to his leading disciples so that they could continue his mission. They hadn't done it. Preaching in the West had proved perilous, even for the Gaudiya Mat's most recognized sannyasis. How could he, a mere householder, presume he could succeed where the others had failed? He was hesitant. The helpless, incapable feeling he'd expressed in his Viraha Ashtaka was there. But now his spiritual master was beckoning him over all other considerations, even over natural humility. Now, although he was elderly and alone, the desire to preach just as his spiritual master had preached remained within him, a fierce, though sometimes quietly expressed, determination. Well, I could just mention here it's stated that preaching in the West had proved perilous even for the Gaudiya Mat's most recognized sannyasis. Basically, they couldn't really do much, really very, very close to doing nothing of any significance. But one of them made a lady in London a disciple initiated by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And I remember just when I joined, within days or a week or a couple of weeks, I would say at the most, one of our devotees went to the home of that lady, which she had sort of adapted into a bit of a preaching center, just out somewhere in the suburbs of London. You know, just a very ordinary house in the London suburbs, terraced house. But it had a sort of a plaque on the door saying that it was the Gaudiya Mat. So the devotee went to visit and to just see what is this place and who is this lady, disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and what's going on and what's all like that. So he went there and knocked on the door, and the lady came to the door and just sort of looked around the door, something like that, or maybe just even looked through the window next to the door. And she wouldn't open the door. She wouldn't open the door to let him in. And she basically told him just to go away. And he came back to the temple and told us about this experience. So, you know, it's amazing actually. The failure of Prabhupada's godbrothers, the failure of Prabhupada's godbrothers, just really amazing and terrible, really terrible. The Vedic standard and the example set by the previous acharyas was that if one wanted to lead a preaching movement, sannyas was required. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had taken sannyas to facilitate his missionary work. Lord Chaitanya had taken sannyas to further the Sankirtan movement. Of course, Lord Chaitanya was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But when his young students had been disrespectful towards him, treating him as an ordinary man, he had taken sannyas. Because a sannyasi is automatically respected, Lord Chaitanya's acceptance of sannyas was a calculated tactic. As soon as he began traveling throughout India as a sannyasi, he immediately attracted thousands of followers to the Sankirtan movement. Knowing that many cheaters would accept the saffron dress and abuse the respect given to sannyasis, Lord Chaitanya had advised against accepting sannyas in the age of Kali. He knew that cheaters in the guise of sadhus would act immorally, accumulate funds for their own sense gratification, and make many followers simply to enhance their own prestige. Posing as swamis, they would cheat the public. Because the people in Kali Yuga are unable to follow the rules and regulations of sannyas, Lord Chaitanya had recommended that they simply chant Hare Krishna. However, if a person could actually follow the rules, and especially if he had to spread the Sankirtan movement, sannyas was necessary. Abai first had to approach one of his godbrothers for permission. He decided to turn to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, formerly Kunja Bihari, the leader of the Chaitanya Math in Calcutta. Kunja Bihari was the one who, by legal means, tried to take over the whole Gaudiya Math after the passing of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And he had used the money of the Math while Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was still present. He'd used the money of the Math to put his children through university to get law degrees so that they could all form a big law team after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disappearance, and in that way, by legal means, take over the properties. And he sort of did. At least he took over the Chaitanya Math in Mayapur. Right. Abai still thought of the Chaitanya Math as the headquarters of his spiritual master's mission. During the heated legal disputes, the Chaitanya Math had been the most prized acquisition, and since 1948, it had been under the legal ownership of Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj. Now, although each sannyasi had his own place or places, the Chaitanya Math and Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj legally represented the Gaudiya Math entity. Abai felt that if he were to take sannyas and go preach in America, he should give the Chaitanya Math the first opportunity to support his work. In April 1959, Abai wrote to Tirtha Maharaj, inquiring about sannyas as well as about the Chaitanya Math's printing some of his manuscripts. And since no one was going abroad, he volunteered to do so on behalf of the Chaitanya Math. Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj replied that Abai should first join the Chaitanya Math. He mentioned the strife that still lingered. Those who are acting against Chaitanya Math, they're motivated by their individual ambitions, unquote. Anyone who was against the Chaitanya Math, he said, was acting illogically and against the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So, according to Tirtha Maharaj, the thing for Abai to do, the thing he had neglected to do for so many years, was to join the Chaitanya Math and act under his direction. Tirtha Maharaj mentioned several members of the Chaitanya Math who had recently accepted the sannyas order, and he said that Abai could also become one in time. He invited Abai to come reside at the Chaitanya Math. Quote, "The houses that we have, there are rooms that are airy and well lit. We will treat you exclusively. There won't be any difficulty. We'll take care that no inconveniences are caused," unquote. But as for printing books, quote, "We are eagerly awaiting to print the books like Satsandarbha, Vedanta, based on devotional service, and many other rare books by the Goswamis. First we will print them. Books written by you will be checked by the editorial staff, and if the funds can be raised, then they can be printed according to priority. The books will be printed only if they're favorable for the service of the Chaitanya Math. Therefore, if the fund is raised, then there's a plan to go abroad as well," unquote. Abai was not encouraged. The main difficulty he felt was the Chaitanya Math's shortage of funds. Srila Prabhupada, "I was working with my broken typewriter. I went to our Tirtha Maharaj. You give me a room and print my books. Give me some money, I will join you. I had thought, this is Guru Maharaj's institution." He did not say no, but the printing of books was a difficult task for him. He had no money. He was hardly collecting for maintaining. Printing of books is a big job, and there is no guarantee of sale, unquote. Without printing books and going to the West, sannyas did not have meaning for Abai. And who knew when Tirtha Maharaj would sanction his taking sannyas? There was no point in going to Calcutta just to reside in an airy, well-lit room. That he already had in Vrindavan. Abai wrote back to Tirtha Maharaj, mentioning his direct order from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to preach to the English-speaking people. He wanted to go to the West right away, and he thought the Chaitanya Math would welcome his offer. Both Abai and Tirtha Maharaj had their responsibilities, but perhaps they could work together to carry out the desire of their spiritual master. Abai asked Tirtha Maharaj to reconsider. On May the 7th, 1959, Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj wrote back, quote, "My suggestion is don't make any hasty decisions. For the time being, you stay with us and engage yourself in the service of the society and then accept Tridanda sannyas. The purpose of accepting Tridanda is to serve the society. If that is your desire, then Sri Chaitanya Math will decide about your going to America to preach and make all the arrangements. It can never be the principle of the society to let one act according to his individual attempt or desire. The society will decide, after consulting with the heads, what is to be done by whom. This is what I want to say. First of all, it is necessary to identify oneself with this society. In order to preach in America or in other foreign countries, it is important to have a dignified organization in the background. And secondly, it's necessary to establish oneself in India before going to preach in the foreign countries. Now it is that there are no conferences or meetings in the West as before. Communication is done through the media of television," unquote. Abai could understand the needs and priorities of the Chaitanya Math, but he could not allow them to overrule what he considered the highest mandate, preaching as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had ordered. Abai had offered his services to the leaders of the Chaitanya Math, thinking they might also see things his way. He thought that with the world's crying need for Krishna consciousness staring them in the face, they might see that this Abai Babu was convinced and enthusiastic, and so should be sent right away with whatever he required. But they had other priorities. Abai next turned to Keshava Maharaj in Mathura. And Keshava Maharaj told Abai to take sannyas immediately. After corresponding with Tirtha Maharaj, Abai had felt some uncertainty about accepting sannyas, and now that he was being encouraged so strongly, he resisted. But Keshava Maharaj was insistent. Srila Prabhupada, I was sitting alone in Vrindavan writing. My godbrother insisted to me, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, you must do it. Without accepting the renounced order of life, nobody can become a preacher. So he insisted. Not he insisted. Practically my spiritual master insisted. He wanted me to become a preacher, so he forced me through this godbrother. You accept. So, unwillingly, I accepted. Okay, Hare Krishna. We will continue from here tomorrow, probably at the same time as today, means at 5 o'clock South Africa time. I'm assuming, because there's load shedding, severe electrical problems. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.